Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Before we dive into today's video, I want to give a quick shout out to Aussie Striker, John Lindley, James Book, Jared Smith, Paolo Corradini, Phil Wood, Tina McCaffrey, and Elijah Scott. Those are our executive producer and producer level patrons. You guys support this channel and all of our patrons and every person who hits like, who subscribes, who leaves a comment. For supporting this channel. I am grateful to you. We could not have this community without you, and I would not be able to do things like going to Belgium next week to make World War I content for the channel without your support. So thank you. If you want to look into becoming a supporter through Patreon, you can do that through the link in the description. It's also always showing up on the screen during reaction videos. All right, so today we're going to dive into the new Extra Credits series on the Easter Rising. I love diving into Irish history. It's not something I've done very often. I do have dreams down the road, a year or two, of taking the family to Ireland. We've got a lot of roots there. It'll happen at some point, and I'm sure I'll get into more history when I do. I confess this is an area of history I don't know a lot about, so I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to learn especially from some of you who do know a lot about this topic. I know we have a lot of followers in Ireland. I've seen the movie Michael Collins, which has Alan Rickman and a bunch of other big name actors in it, but that I think takes place after, in the aftermath of the Easter Rising. I know that Easter Rising's right in the middle of the Great War, World War I. And it's part of the move toward independence for Ireland. So I'm excited to learn. As always, the link's in the description to the original content if you want to check it out without my commentary. Let's go.
Dublin, Ireland, April 24th, 1916. Easter Monday dawns bright, as Dubliners, both Catholic and Protestant, rouse themselves after a day of rest and worship. But some have barely slept at all, as they've spent the holiday making feverish, last-minute preparations. Now, they gather their courage, faith, and guns, and converge on Dublin Castle. As the party rushes the gate, the castle garrison is minimal and unprepared for an attack. The lone policeman on duty, an Irish Catholic who is unarmed, attempts to stop them, but to no avail.
Isn't that interesting that the first guy in the line of fire in this rising is an Irish Catholic? These are Irish Catholics who are primarily going to be fueling this, I would think. There's a lot of history here that goes back centuries and centuries, with England subjugating Ireland. There was a time when Scotland tried to subjugate Ireland. Now when you have Great Britain, they kind of create what we know today as Northern Ireland by sending a bunch of Scottish, basically migrants, over there and creating, it's called Ulster Plantation. And that's why you have the Northern Protestants and then the rest of the island being primarily Catholic, is because they were coming over and intentionally trying to make Ireland more Protestant.
An attacker guns him down as he tries to close the Iron Gate. But by chance, the British Undersecretary for Ireland, Sir Matthew Nathan, sees this happen. So he, along with a few soldiers, scramble to the gate, slamming it shut and locking it as bullets zip by. Then they brace for a siege. For this is no isolated attack. All across the city, armed men and women are ambushing policemen and officials, taking up sniper perches, and raising barricades. The sleepy holiday is giving way to a revolution, an Easter Rising.
So this is just a couple of generations after the what we call the Irish potato famine, which we did a series on that, and I'll throw a link in the description for that if you want to check that out. And so there's a lot of bad blood here, going back a long time. And some of it definitely earned. I mean, the Irish potato famine was a pretty intentional act on the part of the British government that very intentionally caused some real hardship and many deaths to Irish Catholics. And so these are probably the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people who lived through that.
This episode is brought to you by the incredible value proposition that is the Curiosity Stream Nebula Bundle. Seriously, so much stuff under $15, I still honestly don't believe it. But more on that awesomeness after the episode. The Easter Rising is one of the most crucial events in modern Irish history. A rebellion that had been brewing for decades and sparked a period of conflict more ferocious and dynamic than anything seen in over a century. In fact, a bare 6 years after Nathan tried to close the gates of Dublin Castle to the unrest brewing outside, Ireland would be a republic independent from the United Kingdom. Now, it's easy to draw a straight line from the Easter Rising to independence. to tell the tale of a popular uprising against English misrule, full of tragedy, heroism, and defiance.
And I guess it's important to note, because the Easter Rising does fail. I don't think there's any secret that that's the case, because it takes another 6 years for independence. But this is very often the case, that there are people who are going to act and are going to feel like what they did was meaningless and pointless. But all it does is kind of sow the seeds for future success. There were times when you have people like John Brown, and say what you want about John Brown. In some ways, here in the United States, he was kind of a comparable figure, where he did something that was seen by a lot of people as being wrong and murder, and other people saw that as an act of defiance against an evil that needed to be rectified. And so you can see some parallels to that, and parallels throughout history. One person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. It just depends on which side you're on.
But while this series will talk about those things, we'll also discuss the gritty realities of how the Rising came about, what happened when the shooting started, and what changed when it stopped. All of which defy the straightforward narrative of the Republic's founding. Because, in truth, the birth of a nation is never simple. While the history of Ireland's relationship to Great Britain is complicated, the roots of the Easter Rising can be traced back to the rebellion of 1798, when a group called the United Irishmen staged an uprising against British rule. While this would-be revolution, which included a mixture of Presbyterian Protestants and Roman Catholics, was defeated, the pressures it created paved the way for two new Acts of Union. The laws that bound Ireland to Britain, just like an earlier Act of Union had bound Scotland and England.
And so this is where you go from, at the time the United States has its revolution, it's fighting against what? Great Britain. Great Britain is the island, the one island, if you're looking at the British Isles, it's the one on the right. It's Scotland, Wales, England. Now you're going to have the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Now today it's Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Chiefly, these abolished the Irish Parliament in favor of Irish representation in the British Parliament, which some hoped would increase Roman Catholic rights and allow them to serve in government. But progress toward greater Irish autonomy was slow. While there were still no uprisings to the extent of 1798, the Great Famine of the 1840s, which you can learn about after this episode in our series here, had a profound impact. With hunger killing 1 million Irish and forcing roughly another 2 million to immigrate, the famine both...
And as we've talked about in that series, Ireland's population is just now getting back to what it was before the potato famine. Between deaths and emigration, it set it back almost 200 years.
Both changed the face of Ireland and exposed the stark limitations and the frequent cruelty of British policy. A series of land reforms followed as efforts were made to stop the disaster from occurring a second time. By the 1870s, there were increased calls for Irish Home Rule, an idea that Ireland would practice self-governance within the United Kingdom rather than complete independence. This became the mainstream movement among Irish nationalists in the late 1800s.
And I believe that's what Scotland has today, right? I mean, it operates within the United Kingdom, but it does have its own parliament, things like that. I don't know exactly how much autonomy Scotland's parliament has within the United Kingdom, and I think maybe Wales has something similar in Northern Ireland.
And there was some progress. Irish members of parliament introduced 2 Home Rule bills in 1886 and 1893. But while both failed to get past the House of Lords, a third attempt succeeded in 1914. That was because, in the 1910 general election, the pro-Home Rule Irish Parliamentary Party ended up with a powerful voting bloc. Now, we don't have enough time in this series to get into the entire tangled yarn basket of Irish politics and factionalism in the early 20th century. But broadly speaking, there were 2 opposed groups. The Unionists, who were content with Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, and the Nationalists, who wanted some form of independence from Great Britain.
And I believe that still exists today. I remember when the Queen passed away and the new king went to Northern Ireland, that there was a lot of talk, because I believe that the woman who leads the parliament there may be a nationalist who wants Northern Ireland to become a part of Ireland. And so it was kind of a touchy situation, because she was kind of speaking as favorably as she could about the monarchy while recognizing that she herself was not a unionist.
The Nationalists originally believed in peaceful change, but by the early 1900s, a range of nationalist organizations advocated an uprising. But even among these militants, visions of independence differed. Some wanted Ireland to leave the United Kingdom, but remain in the Commonwealth and retain George V as king, while others wanted a complete break and the creation of an Irish Republic. There were also debates about what should be done with the vehemently unionist north of the island. Should it be incorporated or remain part of the UK? And many disagreed over the role of the Roman Catholic Church after separation and whether the new country should adopt the socialist or even communist ideas sweeping Europe. Then,
so you have people who agree on wanting independence, but lots of factions within that on how to go about it and what it looks like afterwards. And until you can deal with that and figure out, get your own ducks in a row, it's really hard to put a united front up. And you can see why some of these smaller groups are then going to want to try to fight. Because if they'd all kind of gotten together and been able to agree and support each other, they might have been able to push things through more peacefully. But that wasn't to be.
On the other side of that divided divide, the thought of home rule caused unrest among Irish Unionists, especially in the north, where Protestantism and Unionism went hand in hand. Irish Protestants feared that even limited independence would result in the erosion of their culture or a purge at the hands of the Nationalists. To combat this, Irish Unionists formed a paramilitary organization, the Ulster Volunteer Force, or UVF.
What could go
Within
wrong?
months, there were over 100,000 members willing to take up arms and defend their Britishness, whether the actual British government wanted them to or not. For instance, on the 25th of April 1914, the UVF successfully smuggled almost 25,000 rifles into Ulster. Predictably enough, the existence of this large Protestant militia worried Irish nationalists, who responded by forming their own paramilitary army, the Irish Volunteers. It seemed the board was being set.
So there's escalation happening among the civilian populace. You got one side saying, we're afraid of what's going to happen, so we're going to arm ourselves. And now the other side says, well, we're afraid of you and what you've decided to do, so we're going to arm ourselves. And it's only a matter of time before this results in violence.
For civil war. But as so often's been the case throughout history, just as conflict seemed inevitable, external events overturned the playing
World War
pieces. In 1914, an archduke died in Sarajevo, and Britain became embroiled in the First World War. Hundreds of thousands of Irishmen, Protestants and Catholics, nationalists and Unionists, put aside their differences to enlist in the British Army. The UVF signed up in droves, forming an entire army division that would go on to fight across the Western Front. And with the war seemingly diffusing the tensions at home,
I wonder if that was the Ulster Division, the 36th Division, which has a beautiful memorial at the Somme battlefield and fought incredibly well. I need to look that up. It was indeed. So it was an infantry division, part of Lord Kitchener's new army, formed in September 1914, originally called the Ulster Division. It was made up mainly of members of the Ulster Volunteer Force, who formed 13 additional battalions for 3 existing regiments, the Royal Irish Fusiliers, the Royal Irish Rifles, and the Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers. Very cool. I did not know that was the origin of that division. That's good to know.
Home rule went to the back burner. But not everyone shifted focus. For while many Irishmen supported the British war effort, some nationalists saw a world war as the perfect opportunity to strike. Both Ireland.
So while they're distracted, while they've got all their resources and all their money and all their military focused on the Western Front and on Gallipoli and on the Middle East and on Africa, now's our chance. I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense.
July 26, 1914. In broad daylight, a ship pulls up to the docks, met by a group of Irish men and women equipped with wheelbarrows and carts. Among them is Countess Markovich, the first woman to be elected to the British Parliament. Under her direction and the other leaders of the group, the ship starts unloading its cargo. 1,500 Mauser rifles. Markovich and those assisting her are Irish nationalists. With the Irish Unionist UVF now armed, thanks to their own gun-running operation, the nationalists are trying to keep up.
So they got German weapons, because obviously they're not going to be able to get Lee Enfields from the British government.
But the news of guns being taken away in wheelbarrows spread quickly, and police and soldiers mobilized to halt the illegal drop-off. A crowd gathers shouting, someone throws a punch, and a brawl ensues. Amidst the confusion, most of the guns make it ashore, disappearing under floorboards and into attics to be retrieved later. The Irish volunteers were now armed.
So this reminds me a little bit of the start of the American Revolution. How did the American Revolution actively get started? The British military was sent out looking for a stash of weapons that American militia had in Concord. And they end up running into that militia in Lexington. A shot gets fired, and we know the rest.
A revolt was simmering, and there was one group determined to make it boil over. The Irish Republican Brotherhood, or IRB, had formed in 1858 as a secretive, oath-bound fraternal organization dedicated to creating an Irish republic. It was one of the main backers of the Irish Volunteers, though it didn't fully control them, and was advocating for an armed uprising. And while rebellion was generally approved of, senior individuals of the IRB found themselves at odds with each other over the specifics. Some believed the time was not yet right for a rising, while others wished to press ahead. And unbeknownst to much of the IRB, a small militant faction within its own ranks, calling itself the Military Council, had tasked itself with planning the rebellion. The council kept these designs secret, not only from the authorities, but from other nationalists who might seek to delay it. Distrust and uncertainty were rife.
So, again, there's that division between the different nationalists. They're keeping this secret even from other nationalists who might not be as extreme, who might not be willing to take that step. Because there might be a lot of people who are in favor of independence, but they're not in favor of bloodshed to make it happen.
But this potential uprising was fraught with risk. British military power was overwhelming, even with troops stripped for the war. So some decided it would be wise to even the odds by winning some foreign backing. And now that Germany was at war
W2, Kaiser Wilhelm II. And that's a German soldier there.
with Britain, the country seemed like the perfect ally for the nationalist movement. And courting assistance from the Kaiser became imperative. To that end, Irish nationalist and former British diplomatic consul Sir Roger Casement was dispatched in secret to negotiate with the Germans in New York and Berlin. If he was successful, German arms and ammunition would flood Ireland, and German soldiers would land in the west of the country, then march on Dublin amid an open rebellion. So as Irish volunteer fighters took their rifles from hidden lofts, they were preparing not just to strike a blow for Ireland, but also for a German victory in the First World War.
So I knew that this all happened. I didn't know the German connection to it, which is fascinating.
And if you'd like to learn more about the
So, okay, I guess we're done with episode 1. Fascinating stuff. There's definitely a lot more to come, and we'll dive into those other episodes in the coming days. I don't know if the series is done. I know 3 episodes have come out. I don't know if there's more still, but I'm sure somebody can let me know that in the comment section below. As always, check out the links in the description to the other channels and to the ways you can support the channel. And we'll be back tomorrow with the next part of this. Thanks for watching.